Sometime in the mid-19th century, a sprawling star-shaped fortification on the eastern seaboard of North America was quietly decommissioned. No battle had been fought there. No siege had broken its walls. The garrison simply packed its equipment, locked the interior chambers, and walked away. The official record called it obsolescence, a fort made redundant by the changing nature of warfare. And for over 150 years, that explanation was accepted without much scrutiny. But here is what the official record did not explain. The structure was still standing, geometrically perfect, its angled bastions oriented with a precision that no purely defensive purpose seemed to require. One thing had been removed before the soldiers left: the copper. Every copper fixture, every metal rod, every grounded conductor that ran through the interior walls had been stripped out and carted away. The fort didn't fall. The light just went out. That detail, the copper, is where this story actually begins. Because what if these structures were never fortifications in the first place? What if the Star Fort, one of the most recognizable architectural forms in recorded history, was not a weapons platform, not a symbol of imperial dominance, but a technology? A receiver, a conductor, a machine built to collect and distribute a form of energy that our civilization has since lost the vocabulary to describe. And the infrastructure to use? I want to tell you how I ended up here, because I did not arrive at this question through an academic seminar or a history textbook. I arrived through a conversation at a dinner table with a structural engineer named Dr. Evelyn Marsh, who at the time was finishing a multi-year survey of earthwork geometries for a research consultancy in Edinburgh. We were talking about nothing in particular when she said, almost as an aside, "You know, the bastion angles on those star forts aren't optimized for overlapping fields of fire the way the textbooks claim. The math doesn't work out. But they are optimized for something. I just don't know what yet." She moved on. I could not. That single offhand remark launched what became 2 years of reading, traveling, and asking questions that conventional military history had no appetite for answering. Before I explain the mechanism, let me give you 4 facts that I want you to hold in your mind. First, there are over 1,000 identified star-shaped fortifications distributed across every continent where European powers established colonial presence between 1500 and 1850. Second, the majority of them were never subjected to a significant military engagement. Third, nearly all of them are positioned near large bodies of water, river confluences, coastal inlets, or underground aquifer zones. Fourth, the geometric angles of their pointed bastions, regardless of whether the structure was built in India, Brazil, South Africa, or the Netherlands, converge with remarkable consistency on a set of ratios that repeat across the entire global inventory. The word itself is a starting point. We call them star forts, but the technical term used by the engineers who built them was the trace Italienne, the Italian trace. In the original Latin, tractiare meant to drag or to draw out, and more specifically to draw current or force through a medium, the Italian trace. The drawing out in the Italian manner. Medieval Italian natural philosophers, the figures we would later call proto-scientists, had developed a sophisticated, if poorly documented, interest in what they called virtu, the inherent active force residing in materials and geometries. The Star Fort, under this reading, was not named for what it looked like. It was named for what it did. It traced, it drew out, it conducted. This is where the work of Dr. James Hartley at the University of Bristol becomes important. Hartley demonstrated that the interior courtyards of several preserved star-formed structures produce measurable standing wave patterns at frequencies between 7 and 12 Hz when specific meteorological conditions are present. Low barometric pressure, elevated ground moisture, and proximity to moving water. 7 to 12 Hz. That is the Schumann resonance range. That is the electromagnetic frequency at which the Earth's own ionospheric cavity naturally oscillates. Human brain states in deep meditation and threshold sleep also operate in this range, a condition of heightened receptivity and reduced cortical resistance. Hartley's measurements were taken at Fort Bortange in the Netherlands and at the Castillo de San Marcos in Florida, two structures separated by an ocean, built by different nations in different centuries and producing nearly identical resonance profiles. The bastions, Hartley argued, are not just angular walls, they are waveguides. Their specific angles function as geometrical reflectors that concentrate and direct standing wave energy toward the central parade ground, the large open courtyard at the heart of every star fort without exception. You do not need a parade ground for defense. A parade ground is an interior space. It is a receiving chamber. Now consider the copper. Copper has an electrical resistivity, making it one of the most efficient conductors of both electrical current and low-frequency electromagnetic energy available to pre-industrial builders. Every documented star fort that has been subjected to rigorous materials analysis contains evidence of extensive copper installation in roof junctions, in embedded wall conduits, in the grounding rods that extended from the bastion tips into the earth below. At Fort Jefferson in the Dry Tortugas, the pattern of original copper installation runs from the outermost bastion points in a continuous circuit through the interior wall structures and terminates beneath the central courtyard floor. That is not a lightning protection system. This is a circuit, and then it was removed, not by decay, not by weather, by deliberate extraction, documented in requisition records from the mid-19th century onward. In the United States, the Fortifications Appropriations Acts passed repeatedly through Congress between 1850 and 1890 systematically funded the maintenance of masonry star forts under the stated justification that rifled artillery had rendered them militarily obsolete. What the historical record does not adequately explain is why the decommissioning process in nearly every documented case included the removal of internal metal infrastructure before the structures were handed over to caretaker administrations. You can find these records. They are in the National Archives. The copper was taken. The structures were preserved. The function was terminated. In France, the systematic dismantling follows an almost identical timeline. The Commission des Monuments Historiques began cataloging Vauban's Great Star Fort network at almost exactly the moment that the internal metalwork of those structures was being removed. Sébastien Leprest de Vauban, the 17th-century military engineer credited with the definitive design of the French Trace Italienne system, left behind extensive written notes on what he called the animating principles of his fortifications. The few researchers who have engaged with them report that Vauban's concerns were not purely tactical. He wrote repeatedly about the relationship between the water-filled berms and the souks, and what he called the movement of subtle force through the construction. Material science analysis of the mortar compounds used in multiple star fort structures has found anomalously high concentrations of magnetite and paramagnetic minerals in the original construction aggregate. Magnetite, a naturally occurring iron oxide that is itself a conductor of electromagnetic energy and a known component of biological magnetoreception. These are not random inclusions. Magnetite is found in the mortar, in the earthwork fill, and in the stone selections at statistically significant concentrations compared to contemporary non-star form structures built from the same regional material sources. The builders are selecting for conductivity at the material level. Every star fort positions its moat, the water channel surrounding the structure, in direct hydraulic contact with the earthen glacis, the sloped outer embankment. Water is a conductor. Earthwork soaked in water is a conductor. The moat glacis bastion courtyard sequence, read as an electrical schematic rather than a defensive perimeter, describes a system for drawing environmental electromagnetic energy from the surrounding terrain, amplifying it through geometric concentration, and delivering it to the interior receiving space. This is not metaphor. This is circuit topology. So why don't we know this? The historians of the 19th and 20th centuries who codified our understanding of star forts were trained in military history, political history, and the history of technology as defined by industrial paradigms. They were not trained in archaeoacoustics, materials science, or pre-industrial energy theory. They were also working in an intellectual climate shaped by a very specific assumption: that pre-modern builders were solving pre-modern problems, meaning defense. That assumption was not malicious. It was a blind spot generated by the era's own ideological commitments to progress and to the narrative that human understanding of energy only began with the Industrial Revolution. When you believe that electricity was discovered in the 18th century, you will not look for electrical infrastructure in a 17th century fortification. You will see a fort. You will not see a machine. But now ask yourself this: why do more than 1,000 of these structures exist on every continent, built by cultures that had no direct communication with one another, all converging on the same geometry? Why are they all located near water? Why do the bastion angles repeat across the entire global inventory with the precision that exceeds any reasonable coincidence of independent military problem solving? Why was the copper removed before the structures were preserved rather than after? Why does Dr. Hartley's resonance data show identical frequency profiles in structures an ocean apart? Why did Vauban write about subtle force and not just overlapping fields of fire? Why does the parade ground, the central receiving space, exist in every single example without a single defensive justification? And if these structures were purely military, why does the military record show almost no significant battles fought within them? Why were they built and then almost immediately, by historical standards, switched off? I asked Dr. Evelyn Marsh that last question recently. She had by that point finished her Edinburgh survey and published a paper that stopped just short of saying what I am saying here, the way academic papers tend to stop just short. I asked her if she had ever stood in the central courtyard of a star fort under the right conditions: low pressure, high ground moisture, near moving water, and felt anything. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I was at Bourtange in November. There was a low front coming in off the North Sea. I stood in the center of the parade ground, and the sound of the wind just stopped. Not because the wind stopped, because the geometry was collecting it. And I felt something move through the floor and up through my feet and into my chest. A vibration. Regular, slow, like a pulse. I stood there for about 20 minutes, and I didn't want to leave." She paused. "I don't have a professional vocabulary for what that was. But I know what it wasn't. It wasn't a fort. The copper is gone. The circuits are open. The structures still stand, geometrically perfect, patiently oriented, pointing their angular bastions toward the sky and the water and the earth. But the geometry remains. And if Hartley's frequencies are right, if Reinhardt's magnetite concentrations are right, if Marsh's November morning at Bourtange was what it felt like it was, then something is still moving through those walls. We just stopped knowing how to listen for it."